searching for answers.
Here are today's top stories.
It's been over 24 hours.
And the local news.
What we see are a lot of things that are going on the earth.
This is Art of Heaven News Talk.
Yes, it is. Broadcasting live from WHPC Studios in Garden City, New York. This is Art of Heaven News Talk, where we deliver global, national, and local news through the lens of faith. I'm your host, Johnny Brummett, and joining me today are my co-hosts, pastor and theologian Nathan Gassaway, and making his debut on Art of Heaven News Talk is media personality Arnold Koku. If you want to join the conversation, lines are open at 516-572-7440. It's 516-572-7440. How's it going today, fellas?
Hey, Johnny.
Hey, John.
All right. Well, this show is one of a kind, I feel like, today, because we got Arnold here.
Welcome, Arnold.
Welcome to Art of Heaven News Talk. Now, I say today's show is going to be a little different because, first off, I'll just say I love action movies. And I feel like today's show, where we're going to catch up and hit some of the top headlines over the past week. Some of these headlines this past week are so action-packed that it's going to be an exciting show.
It's kind of a global scale. Yeah, what do we have in the lineup?
Well, the first story here I got to talk about is actually something pretty cool and intriguing. The portal between New York and Dublin had to close. Did you see this portal that was open over in New York City?
Yeah, this was something out of sci-fi in a way. I used to watch this show called Stargate, although you actually could step into the portal and be kind of teleported to another a galaxy or something. But this is not quite that, is it, Arnold?
Yeah, no, it's you can't really walk through it and be face to face, but you can interact with a different city. In this case, they picked Dublin. Out of all the cities they could have picked, they picked Dublin. Yeah.
So it's not a real portal.
No, it seems like it's shaped like a portal, like a round thing, but it looks like what they've just done is made some really high-tech video screens on either side, and essentially it looks like you're looking through a glass at someone else, but it's really the signals being relayed and presented, I guess, in real time, or as close to real time as you could get.
Yeah, right? It's essentially a Zoom meeting on a round screen that's made into that portal shape, so it looks like a portal, but if you tried to walk through it, you'd bump your head into the glass.
That's the exact design. It is. I'm just playing around. I'm hoping for a portal someday to teleport, but this thing is pretty cool. It's like an octagon, and it's an LED wall, but it's live between countries.
So something went wrong then.
Yeah, it was definitely taking advantage of being live.
Yeah, what could go wrong there?
I mean, I saw characters walking up there showing their phones of like RIP Pop Smoke.
Showing their phones might be the least of the worries, especially when people are kind of disconnected from the other side, so to speak.
One thing that was kind of disturbing is somebody held up their phone, and it was a video of the Twin Towers burning. And I would just like to know, what was that person's intentions?
Well, it's always hard to discern people's intentions, what's going on in their mind, but some took it to mean that they're kind of mocking what took place, or there's some kind of socio-political statement. I don't know. Who knows what goes on in people's minds?
Or they could have just been like, hey, we feel you. We remember what happened. I mean, you never know. I would just like to actually have a conversation with that person. But it looks like they're going to put this thing back up and try to put some things in place to prevent this ridiculousness from happening, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, right? Because where does the responsibility lie, right? It sounds like there's some responsibility put on the person that designed the portal and created it and put it out there on operation. But at the same time, if I put a mirror on the corner of my house and someone sits on my front porch and lifts up their finger, and someone in the side street can see it through that mirror, is the mirror at fault, or is the person that's raising their finger at fault? And so I think it's an interesting discussion about responsibility and what is required and what is appropriate behavior and what is not appropriate behavior. Who determines it? And then there's local laws that would be different. You could have different views. You pick the city like Dublin in this case, they will have a different view than New York potentially. But if you pick different cities, that could even be far different.
Well, that's very interesting because we tend to think that other countries or cities, their laws are like ours, or at least maybe unconsciously like that. But they may not have the same values or kind of what is going to, like in South Korea, guys rarely take off their shirts. That's almost like naked. But here, nobody would care. So it seems to me that what would be considered appropriate or risque would vary quite a bit. And you connect two nations so closely, I mean, it makes it look like they're just a couple feet away. It could go wrong.
Yeah. I definitely don't put it up at a European beach, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So you're for prosecuting the people, not the designer of it.
Well, it depends. There's a big discussion around this, right? I think early 2000s, late 90s, IBM had big discussions with the government about, hey, you should leave the internet free, don't regulate it. And I think they've since come back from that. But, so there's some important discussions tied to mediums, like as you communicate through media, how, where do you lie that responsibility and to what extent do you want to control it, right? And can you then trust that control? And I'm thinking about a couple of years back, I went back to visit some family in the Netherlands, and I went to Corrie ten Boom's house. You would say Corrie ten Boom here, like, the writer of the book, The Hiding Place, in the movie. And, one of the things, people were wondering, like, how did the Second World War get started? And why didn't it get stopped earlier? And one of the reasons was the media was controlled by the government. And it was, infiltrated to the extent that all the mainstream media was hiding the original message. But the Ten Booms had read the book called Mein Kampf from Adolf Hitler. They knew what he was up to. And if you look at Corrie's father, his name is Casper, he fought in the resistance with his pen and started his own publications. So whenever you start to regulate stuff, there's, you want to figure out what is the balance and how do you go about that?
Well, just how far do we trust the government in policing free speech? In the U.S., we have pretty strong protections of free speech, but it does seem to some extent they're being eroded. And so people get a little bit nervous when the government starts dictating, censoring things, really. So, yeah.
You're listening to Art of Heaven News Talk on 90.3 WHPC. This is an interesting conversation because there's a lot going in. This is a perfect segue into the next story here about the Prime Minister of Slovakia being shot multiple times in an assassination attempt. What do you know about that?
So, that's a very sad set of events. I mean, I would never condone, killing someone to gain, like, whatever objective you have. I think it's very sad because there's a whole history here with Slovakia. In fact, also with this minister, he was kind of climbing up in the ranks. He wanted to climb up in the communist ranks, and he was studying, and as he finished up, the Cold War ended, and so his whole landscape kind of fizzled out on him, and he had to kind of find new grounds. And then, right following that, you had the separation of Czechia and Slovakia, and they split up, and Czechia had most of the urban areas and the money-making pieces. Slovakia had Bratislava. So now, but then there's about 50% of Slovakia ends up with the farmers, the small villages that are trying to make ends meet. But it's not what you would expect compared to what you would have in the U.S. They're not as independent. They are actually dependent, looking for outreaches from the government and looking for more firmer control. So there's a real divide in the country. And so then there is the whole media piece. It's kind of a good tie-in to the previous topic. Is like they were trying to control the radio, TV services and bring more government control into that. And that was this minister's spiel. So, shooting a minister, obviously the assassination is very counterproductive to a democracy, but so was what he was doing. So that's a fascinating argument. I would not condone killing anyone, but
of course not. But it is ironic that he was shot, and here he is, kind of would be the poster boy in some sense. We're speaking of Prime Minister Fico, by the way.
Yep.
But I think he's still in critical condition. They've got him stabilized, last I heard. But this was quite a shock to the region, no doubt. And if you can assassinate political opponents or even people you differ with in ideologies, you get into dangerous ground.
Yeah, you're in the Wild West.
It was definitely politically motivated. The guy literally waited to greet him until he ran up on him and got him and just shot him 5 times. But thank God he's still with us. And you grew up in Europe, Arnold.
I grew up in the Netherlands, yeah.
In the Netherlands. So what is it like in Europe politically compared to America?
I don't know that there's a lot of differences where to begin. Like in the Netherlands, you have a parliament system where, you have seats in the house from each party, and there is like a lot of parties. Here you have like 2 mainstream parties. It's like Democrats and Republicans. So that's a big difference. I think in general where Europe is at, one of the concerns I had, many years back before I came here is, you have a public sector, you have a market sector being the people that pay taxes, public sector being people that work in government, people that are receiving unemployment, disability, etc., that are basically receiving. And so one has to fund the other. And if you get to a population that gets larger, that is in the receiving mode, and you have a smaller population that is actually providing the funds, then a democratic model actually breaks down in terms of if you wanted to defend your own money, you'll have a harder time doing so.
That makes perfect sense. And there seems to be, at least in Europe and certainly some Asian countries as well, a decline in birth rates. And so now you're getting a population that's older, and we need people to really run the engine of the economy, younger people. So this is tricky, but it's always struck me about Europe that we take for granted in the U.S., even though there's so much diversity here. By and large, there's a little bit of homogeneity in terms of you've got these states. Typically, one state is in a war with the other, or there's enough similarity that the overarching national sentiment is stronger than the individual one. But when you try to have something like a European Union, it's been like patchwork it seems to me from the outside looking in, that trying to get everybody to play nicely together, wildly different values among various countries and so on and so forth. So I've always thought it interesting how complex that is and how to navigate the socio-political landscape. It's always amazing to me that anyone would even want to jump into the public sector.
Yeah.
This is Art of Heaven News Talk, and if you want to join the conversation, the number is 516-572-7440. Now, there's a lot of stories coming out of Europe today, and thank God you're here, Arnold, because you can shed some light on this. What is going on over there? I'm reading this story about what happened in France. Now, this one's gonna be an action-packed thriller on the big screen someday, it looks like. Now, a prisoner was being transported, nicknamed the Fly, and I don't know if you saw this video, but they were coming through a bridge, and right when they got through the toll, car came up, smashed the van transporting the prisoner, busting the engine. It wasn't going to. Armed guys came out and just unloaded assault rifles on all the guards. Well, 2 of them passed. I think the 3 are still in the hospital, and they got this prisoner out of the van and they took off. And the crazy part is these guys must have been watching a lot of action movies, because like 2 miles away, they found 2 separate cars burnt that they transported multiple times, and this guy's still on the run.
Yeah, it's like a scene out of Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
And this is the second notorious fly in France's history. This guy apparently a thug, a drug dealer, just really organized crime, so that he was sprung from his mobile cage here is quite an impressive feat, I think.
Yeah, it's just a wild story to me, man. And the craziest part about it was it doesn't even look like he was that crazy of a guy. Like, I would love to know what his boys, his buddies had in their mind when they went and did this. Like was he that important of a guy? He's not El Chapo,
I think it's more like what he knew. Like, once you're infiltrated enough in these organizations, the rest of the organization is going to worry if any of them is in capture, right? Because you might talk. And so he's going to get some help. And it's talking about like better together strategies, right? Like it works well in like churches when you try to do good, but it also works well when you try to do bad. The whole concept is when you work as a team, you get things done.
Yeah, organization, whether it's criminal or churchly, I guess has its pros and cons. But and who knows about human personality? He might have seemed like an unassuming guy to many people, but he wasn't not shrewd. We'll just say it that way.
Yeah, he was locked up 15 times since he was young, and a couple of them were for extortion and assault and robbery and all these things. But what leadership? The guy got his boys to literally murder guards to break them free. I mean, they're not looking to get caught.
So as a team, they're definitely skilled, right? It's just you wish they would use their skills for good, but they're definitely skilled. And
on top of that, this is France. I don't. When I think of France, I don't think of this happening, right?
Well, I don't know. You have to be. I had my phone stolen in Spain, and France has some bad areas too. So there are areas of Europe, in Spain, in France, in the UK, where a lot of criminal activity is taking place, and almost like fortresses, bastions of criminal activity in certain sectors of cities. So I think we underestimate just how bad some areas are.
Yeah, and how well they work together because they formed that fortress, as you say. So that's a challenge because even the police don't want to, enforce what they should be enforcing because it's scary. And I even watched these videos with people coming out and shooting. They had upped the power to protect this or to keep in custody this prisoner from 3 to 5 heads, right? And still, if you saw when they jumped out, there was not much they could do. So
yeah, wow. We'll have to see if these guys get caught and what their motives were, how it really played out, behind the scenes. But on to our next story here at Art of Heaven News Talk. This one is back here on our homeland, and it is such a action-packed story as well. But this one has a happy ending here. Now, the driver of a semi-truck that was going over the Clark Memorial Bridge in Louisiana happened to get hit by an oncoming truck. Okay? Now, when it was hit, it caused this semi-truck to veer into the lane and literally drive off of the bridge, dead center, just about. And somehow, the very back of this semi-truck was caught on the bridge, and it was dangling. Now, picture yourself as the semi-truck driver. This woman, she was sitting there, faced the water, hanging, dangling in the cab of this semi-truck. And I actually got some snippets, and I really gotta, I can't describe it well enough, but just to play in her own words.
When I went through the railing, I was like, I was just thinking like, wow, this is crazy to die like this, and I really thought that I was about to die. And I was like, well, I can try to hurry up and take the seatbelt off and jump out of the truck if I have enough time to, where I'm like, I'm gonna have to jump. I can't swim either.
Now, if you really go back and watch this video, it is insane. This whole semi-truck was literally dangling straight down into the water off the bridge. Now, she described in the interview that she just held her hands on the wheel and she kept her foot on the brake. Picture that. She was scared. She sat there for 40 minutes till she was ultimately rescued. Thank God. But she was scared to even take her foot off the brake.
Yeah, I mean, she was in between a rock and a hard place, in a precarious situation because could plummet to your death. If she tried to jump, she may drown because she can't swim. I mean, you're staring down at water. But yeah, this is a scary situation.
So scary. I just can't get enough of this. I'm going to play a little bit more of her interview here.
I have to be still because if I move an inch, the truck might shift and fall over. And I started praying and, I kept asking. I was like, I can't believe this, that I'm really hanging over the river. I was in shock. I was like, this is crazy.
Now, the craziest part about this story, right, to me, is when, the rescue efforts kind of came together and a guy propelled off the bridge down to the cab of the truck and helped her out. As he's helping her out of the truck, he says to her, are you a praying woman? And she says, yes. He's like, start praying. Because at any minute, this truck could have just, collapsed right into the bridge. But the most amazing part I have to shed light on here at Art of Heaven News Talk is this last piece of her words in the interview. Let's hear it.
I just kept crying out to God, please, Lord, just give me another chance. Sometimes you pray, and I'm guilty of this. Sometimes I pray and I don't think God is listening. But he was that day.
Wow. Can you put yourself in her shoes?
Yeah, what's most amazing to me is she actually thought that the trailer was still on the bridge, but it was actually like the whole cabin and the trailer was sticking out off of the bridge also. And so she, the brakes didn't do anything for her, but she couldn't even have known, but she really was at risk of going into that water at any time. So the guy was absolutely right to say, hey, are you a praying woman? Because we better pray, right? That's like,
well, and she said, well, God was listening that day. I would say God's listening at every moment.
He is.
And, too often we make prayer a last resort, not a first resource. And there are things like this that remind us that actually, when you're in trouble, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And in this case, this woman, backs against the wall, so to speak. I mean, she's dangling by a thread. She turns to God, and thank God she's rescued. But I think it's a powerful testimony that there's a good God who's looking out for us. And, some people will chalk it up to coincidence. I just know this coincidences happen more often when I pray. So
Well,
I stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago.
So you're saying it's not on God, it's actually on us, that we're only shooting up those foxhole prayers.
Yeah, I think what we do oftentimes wait, when we have nothing else. Well, if all else fails, I'll pray. But again, prayer shouldn't be a last resort. It should be a first resource.
Well, I'm going to play this last bit because it looks like she got her prayer answered.
He was like, are you a praying woman? And I was like, yep. And we just started praying. I got what I prayed for, and somebody came and got me out of the truck.
Amen.
You talk about a living witness. There you go.
Yeah.
Seriously. So if you're listening out there and you're going through something, even when it's not the worst scenario, shoot up a prayer. Talk to God.
Amen.
Now, this last bit is a very interesting story here in Art of Heaven News I'm going to bring up. Is something about whales having an alphabet to communicate?
Yeah, it looks like scientists discover a so-called phonetic alphabet used by sperm whales. Now, if you don't know it, sperm whales actually have the biggest brains of all animals on the planet, about 17 pounds. But that doesn't necessarily translate into IQ per se or whatever. But apparently these researchers have detected something like the building blocks of whale language, and they are describing it as an alphabet. Now, that might be taking it a little bit too far in my view, because alphabets are a little bit more discrete and complex and really abstract in some ways. But what is interesting about this story is that it does seem like it's shedding light on the communication between whales, whether these vocalizations create more context. It is a kind of language. I wouldn't be on a par with the human language, but it does draw a lot of attention to these very smart creatures and the need to take care of our environment and, protect animals like this. So I thought it was very interesting. I don't know that I buy it's an alphabet, but hey, language has been around a long time. I don't think whales have had the same level as humans, but you can, even in biblical history, you can go all the way back to the Tower of Babel, right? We talk about, we even use the term babbling today. So, yeah.
So what is the biblical history of languages? Can you break that story down to us?
Well, just very quickly, the Tower of Babel was this pyramid-like thing. We might call it a ziggurat. That was, if you go to Genesis chapter 11, it's a story where the people of that region wanted to make a name for themselves. And so they built something like we might consider an escalator and an elevator. It wasn't really so much for them to reach heaven. It was for the deity to come down. And they thought that they could make a name for themselves and actually, through their own will and power, kind of manipulate the deity in a kind of a quid pro quo relationship. This is how it would have been understood in the ancient Near East. In fact, the Akkadian word where we kind of related to Babel means a gateway to the gods. We talked about Stargate earlier. But the point is that when humans, it's become a synonym for human pride, hubris, thinking that we can do things. And it's all, when humans are trying to just make a name for themselves, they fall short of the true creator of all things. So you can't manipulate God. You can't have God on your own terms. The truth is, our goal is to make him famous, not ourselves.
Wow. And somehow the whales got it down.
The whales, yeah, but maybe not with the same complexity.
Well, Thank you for tuning in. This has been another episode of Art of Heaven News Talk on 90.3 WHPC. I want to thank my co-hosts, Arnold Kokuk and Nathan Gassaway.
Thanks, Johnny.
Catch us here every Friday, 3:30 to 4 East Coast time. God bless. Till next week.